Hey podcaster, meet Acast. We're the top independent podcast network for creators in the know. We empower you to develop your podcast idea, find your audience, and grow listener relationships wherever those listeners are. You'll also find a whole range of ways to make money, from membership plans for paying fans to our fully curated and creative advertising experience. Visit acast.com/network to find out more. Acast, for the stories.
Welcome back to the Rugby League Digest. I'm Michael Adams, and I'm here not with Andy, but with Daniel Watson-Hayes. This is our Western Suburbs case study. Daniel is a former board member and general manager of the club, football club member, and a long-term fan of Western Suburbs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I really appreciate you joining me, Daniel. You got in touch with me a while ago, so I've had you penciled in as my West guy for some time now, with no immediate plans to get that done. But with the sad passing of Tommy Raudonikis last week, I thought it was a good time to bring in you to talk about Western Suburbs. So right at the top, I just want to spend some time paying tribute to Tommy Raudonikis. I want to get to the Western Suburbs of it all, but before that, I've actually been surprised just like how big the outpouring has been. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's been quite remarkable, Mick, in terms of seeing not only Western Suburbs fans and Newtown fans, but the entire rugby league fraternity, the outpouring, the love, the affection that everyone had for the man they referred to as Tom Terrific. And I think that goes to show the cut through and the gravitas and the respect and the esteem that he was held in by everyone that came to know the legend that was Tom Raudonikis. I mean, there's probably three to four generations that probably never ever got to see him play. They've seen footage, they've heard the outlandish stories that have become folklore. But whenever they saw or heard Tommy talk, I think there was an element of authenticity about it. And I mean, there's one thing that I think resonates and has cut through is, the ability not to bullshit. And that was Tommy. And I think that's where a lot of the respect came from. He was a bit of a throwback in terms of, being old school and everything. But one thing that, and I think Roy Masters covered it really, really well this week. He said that, when you talk about integrity, from the top of Tommy's head to Tommy's, toes, that's all he was. He was authentic. He had integrity. There was no BS about him. I think all of those things sort of cut through, and that's why there was such an outpouring, because Tommy appealed to everyone, not just Western Suburbs Magpies and Newtown Jets fans, but he appealed to everyone, and he became that lovable rogue that he could get away with things that everyone else couldn't. And he was just overall, if you had to sum him up, it would just be in a word, it would just be genuine. He was genuine.
I was saying it to Andy last night. We recorded an episode. I was saying that it's the type of thing that would usually bug me as, a rugby league history lover, the way that the focus has gone so much onto the character, not so much his achievements in the game. And certainly when he first died, it did kind of bug me a bit. But as the days went on and you're getting all these stories, like, he was such an outsized character that, I mean, it takes that outsized character to put, 30 tests for Australia and such a successful playing career in the shade. And so I think for, until Tommy recedes from living memory, I think the character is like his biggest contribution to the game. And that's saying so much considering his on-field contributions.
Yeah, exactly right. And you're right with what you say. I mean, like for someone to play, 29 tests for Australia, and he virtually held the number 7 test jersey for 10 years. That speaks volumes. And, and then the list of accolades that, in terms of all the state games, being the inaugural, New South Wales State of Origin captain in 1980, inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Australian Rugby League NRL Hall of Fame, life member and team of the century for Western Suburbs Magpies. I mean, like the list goes on. He's an OAM, like, for his contribution to rugby league. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than that. But yeah, it's funny. It's his character has usurped and taken the focus on all of his achievements and accolades that he's amassed from 1969 to 1982. It was just it was amazing. It was amazing to see. But you're right in what you're saying. It's whilst it probably can be seen and looked probably a little down on, well, he's not being remembered for everything he contributed on the field. When you can have that list of achievements to fall back upon, and the character itself continues to, I suppose, preserve and promote rugby league in a different realm. You know what I mean? So I think there's an equilibrium, and both can be balanced. And he's one of those players, and he's one of those characters that can have the same level on both counts, rather than not just being all football or not just being all character. He's got the best of both worlds. And how many ex-players and former players can say that? No,
exactly. And one of the really touching things for me was seeing the way the current Blues team talked about him. I don't think there are many other players of his generation that would, the current players would relate to on such a, profound personal level. There's obviously the respect and, admiration for all the achievements, but like Tommy was one of them. Like there just didn't seem to be any separation. I think that is a very rare and special thing.
And I think he saw himself as one of them as well. That was the thing. Mm. So when you've got a former great like that who sees himself as one of them, I think that's what commands so much respect and why they hold him in such esteem. And he's got that. He's always had that. And you've he's been eulogised all week, and there's no greater I suppose recommendation and praise that Paul Langmack, John Skandalis have all come out and they've all said you just didn't want to let him down. Mm. Like for all of his antics and lack of technical nous, etc. The one thing that I suppose Tommy had compared to other coaches is that he had that ability that you just did not want to let him down. You know what I mean? Yep. And that speaks volumes as a coach, as a person.
And you say he cut through. He cut across club lines, state lines. There's no one would. In the last week, you'd be hard pressed finding a more universally loved figure in the game. But it is something special for Western Suburbs fans in particular. So, do you want to maybe touch on what he means to Western Suburbs?
I think everything. I think he epitomises what the club is about and what the club's built on. They've been the Paneria whipping boys for 113 years, the poor old Magpies, and him in that late 1970s era, that 1978 when the Fibros came to fruition through the Roy Master siege mentality, and Tommy sort of led that charge. He was a battler, and the club was a battler club, and I think Tommy's influence provided that real connection with the Western Suburbs faithful, but also with anyone who deemed themselves to be a battler or of blue collar, working class, low socioeconomic, and people used to basically gravitate to that. And that's what Western Suburbs has always been about. It's the Western Suburbs, District Rugby League Football Club has always been about, the working class, the little man, punching well above your weight. It doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, or where you came from. There was that inclusiveness that the Magpies have always had, and that was Tommy. Tommy epitomised that in every sense of the word, and actions as well. And No, every other player sort of, went with him. He was a leader of men, and he led in that regard. He led that. He was proud to be a battler. It wasn't something that he shirked. It wasn't something that he dismissed. He owned it, and because he owned it, everyone else was proud to be it as well. So he was a trailblazer in many ways for Western Suburbs. He was a trailblazer for the community. Everyone that virtually lived in the Western Suburbs of Sydney, regardless if they weren't a Western Suburbs Magpies fan, they always loved to see the Maggies do well, because purely the fact that they were the underdogs, they were the battlers, and any time that they would get a scalp or they had any sort of immediate success, it was a good thing for the community. It was a good thing for the game, and there's always been anecdotes and lines throughout rugby league forever and a day that, for example, when South Sydney's doing well, rugby league's doing well. Well, I think the same can be said for Western Suburbs. When Western Suburbs were in there punching well above their weight, and 1978 they were minor premiers, and whenever they made a finals appearance, rugby league was in pretty good shape. If you got a battling club and a battling team that probably had a roster that probably was lucky to be get out of the bottom four, so to speak, through many of its generations. For them to achieve what they did, and Tommy led that, and that was so important back then, when you looked at the state of affairs that the football club was at in terms of finances and running on the smell of an oily rag. Yet they superseded all that through just pure passion and I suppose again really owning that battler and making sure that inspired not only the football club but it inspired the entire Western Suburbs community.
Yeah, and you mentioned Roy Masters and the Fibros. Like, it's stroke of coaching genius to be able to instill that in the team. But it would have been nothing without having someone like Tommy there to buy it up wholesale and then make sure everyone in that team was instilled with that same mentality.
I don't think it happens without him, to be honest. Les Boyd and Warren Boland, and there's a few other players, Ray Brown, they didn't really believe it. But they went along with it purely the fact because Tommy ensured that everyone needed to buy in, and as was the ability to man manage and bring a team together like Roy Masters did and inspire. They bought in. They were team players in that regard. But I don't think that happens without Tom Rodonicus's influence and his leadership to really make sure that belief was widespread throughout that team.
Yeah, agreed. And there will be some more Tommy talk as we go through this episode. But at the top, just wanted to say a towering loss for rugby league, and what a contribution he made.
Extremely.
So let's turn to Western Suburbs as a whole, and to start off with, maybe we'll introduce your connection to West. So where did it all start with you? What's your history with the club?
Yeah, it's funny. I was brought into this world in 1983, which was a very significant year for the Western Suburbs Football Club. But I was born and bred in southwest Sydney. I've lived in Fairfield all my life, and my family actually had roots to Belmore. So my parents were childhood sweethearts, and they lived opposite sides of Kingsgrove Road, 24 and 27 respectively, which is about 100 yards from the George Hotel and Canterbury Road, and another 100 yards from Belmore Sports Ground. So blue and white, the berries has ran through my family's veins to the fact that my dad used to hold the pads for Kevin Ryan to warm up at Belmore Sports Ground.
Yeah.
And he was that blue and white that if Canterbury ran right to left, he'd stand on this side of halfway. And if they ran left to right, he'd stand on this side of halfway. And he was as blue and white as anything. And he did his best to try and brainwash me and coerce me to become a Bulldogs fan. But I was corrupted by my late grandfather, who was born and bred in Leeton and moved to Strathfield. And as many people did back then, you supported your local team. And the local team was Western Suburbs. So in 1990, when Dad kept dragging me along to Belmore and tried to get me to cheer Bulldogs, etc., my late grandfather got in my ear and said, "Why don't you give Western Suburbs a go?" Well knowing that they were about to go on a run of success, having signed Warren Ryan and co. And I thought, yeah, all right, no worries, I'll give them a go. And before you knew it, bang, 91 happens and they make the finals. 92 happens, they make the finals, and all the rest of it. I thought, geez, they go all right, this black and white team. And that was the end of it. I've been a Western Suburbs supporter since 1990, thanks to my late grandfather, whose hero was Keith Holman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So and that was it. That was the end of the. That's how it all sort of panned out from there. So I've been a Magpie since 1990, since the age of 7.
You touch on something there that I think is very unique about Western Suburbs. They were your grandfather's local team in Strathfield, your local team in Fairfield. You've got this move from Ashfield to Lidcombe to Campbelltown without losing that Western Suburbs identity. It's really unique that a team could make that move, 3 times and not lose anything or have their identity changed.
And to that point, Michael, it's funny. I don't think any other club would have actually had that sustained element of support, if you like, and purely the fact that demographics, which probably we talk to the Bradley report all the time, but the demographics of Western Sydney continued to evolve and change as Sydney grew larger, and more of the blue collar, the working class sort of people started to move further west, and so did Western Suburbs Magpies. So it wasn't like they moved to the other side of the country. It's the fact that, whilst the football club was moving, so too was the actual supporter base, to the fact that they started in Ashfield, which you go back to 1908, in 1908, Ashfield was the Western Suburbs, and then Lidcombe became the Western Suburbs. And then eventually the southwest corridor of Sydney became the Western Suburbs. So therefore, if anything, I'd call it, the stars aligned perfectly for the football club, and things obviously went their way in terms of, Newtown falling over and that presenting an opportunity for the Magpies to move to the Macarthur region. But you're right in what you say, the demographics as the demographics shifted further west, fortunately for Western Suburbs, so did they. So they if anything, it was like very, the correlation of them continuing to move together in unison was very beneficial.
Let's go to one of those moves, and let's talk about 1983. What we didn't do in our series was really spend any time looking at how it got to that point, how it got to the point where they were on their knees, had the chairman urging fans to buy tickets in the guessing competition and the chook raffles and all the rest of it. How did it get so bad?
Yeah, it's funny. Even now, like football club members and long life Magpie fans talk about, the one constant that's always been there with Western Suburbs has had this inept administration. You take out I suppose you take out the 1950s where they were referred to as the Millionaire Magpies, but apart from that, they've always been at war with one another. Not much has changed now from a hierarchical perspective with the football club and West Ashfield, etc. Don't get me wrong, agendas are right across the board in every football club. No one's immune in that regard.
Rugby league is fueled by agenda. So.
That's how it survives. It's one of those things where I think the constant inept administration over a long period of time got to that point where it just so happened that you had the Manleys of the world and Newtowns of the world with rich benefactors and affluence started to pick apart the success that Western Suburbs started to amount in that late 70s period, especially 78 being minor premiers, and then even having success and making finals even up until 1982. And then all of a sudden it just sort of fell in a heap. And again, usually that always comes back to, front office. And again, there was probably numerous factors in having a team that was on the precipice of winning a premiership, and then being dismantled through, not being able to coerce and retain quality players because they couldn't compete with the finances of every other club. And like anything, the constant, you look at success right throughout, I suppose all the way up into the salary cap era, is that the teams that had success were the teams with the cash, and the poor old Magpies didn't have a lot of it. So that was probably, I think, the beginning of the end, and why they became such a target for the New South Wales Rugby League in terms of, omitting them from the 1983 Premiership.
And had a couple of two key strokes of luck over the course of the 80s, with firstly the court, the New South Wales Rugby League winning the appeal, the court ruling that they had the right to exclude West from the 1986 season, I think it was. Yeah. But, the plan's already in place for that season, so West being allowed to continue. Then Newtown's move to Campbelltown falling over, West being able to come in and grab that patch of territory. I mean, those two things really saved the Magpies. I'm interested to know, I don't know if you have any insight, is there any bitterness between Newtown and West fans, that you kind of stole their area?
Yeah, you know what? Like, from my dealings and from what I can gather, there is none. There is none, because I think if you went along to Henson Park this weekend and you surveyed majority of people that are going to be sitting on the hill and in the King George V Memorial stand, they'd all be saying that they didn't want to go to Campbelltown. They didn't want to relocate. It was going to provide, longevity and certainty and stability and guarantee their success. But Newtown was very, very rusted on in staying in Newtown. They didn't really want to shift their base. So whilst it was sad to see, the Blue Bags go by the wayside, to see what they've amassed now, and now they've got a different remit as a football club, and the success that they've been able to attain through their feeder arrangements over the years has served them very, very well in that regard. And they've generated a whole brand new generation of fan as well. That inner west Marrickville, hipster type, demographic there. It's cool to be a Newtown.
Yeah,
a Jets fan, you know what I mean? It's a day out. It's something to do in the area, and they've got a new connection there. So whilst they've probably had 8 or 9 generations of Newtown Jets fans that have passed on, there's this new breed of rugby league supporter, a community-based level, which I don't think any other rugby league supporter base has, to be honest. They've got a real, homely connection with Newtown. But to your point, from what I can gather, there is absolutely no angst, there's no animosity, there's no hatred or bitterness between Western Suburbs and Newtown fans at all. There's that real sort of cordial relationship that we're foundation club brothers that have been dealt a pretty hard hand by the rugby league fraternity over a period of time. So there is that sort of commonality that we've both been stiffed, and I think going through some hardships and adversity, you build a bond, and apart from being foundation clubs, there is that connection there.
And this is just an aside, but something I thought of while you were talking then is Newtown is almost the inverse of West. Instead of moving to keep up with the demographic, there's a kind of cultural shift to keep the club where it is and adapt to a changing demographic.
Absolutely. Very much so. Yeah.
Let's talk about where you come into it with the Warren Ryan era. So obviously any long-time listener of this show will know that he's our hero. What are your thoughts and memories of that era of success in the early 90s?
Yeah, I think, well, again, as I touched on, I came to become a Western Suburbs supporter at the right time, where you had the successful premiership winning coach in the WOC, and what he managed to do for the Magpies is bring about almost immediate success in terms of, bringing along the Canterbury connection that he had at the Bulldogs. The likes of my childhood hero in Paul Langmack, Joe Thomas, David Gillespie, and the like. He brought over Jim Dimmick from South Sydney. And then the coupled with the players that they already had there as well, and the emergence of Jason Taylor, Patrick O'Doherty, they had some really, really good players there, and it was no surprise at all for them to have the success they did with the list that Warren Ryan was able to put through. And 91 was a great year for the club because they won the New South Wales Rugby League Club Championship that year as well. And then to go on to 92 and their President's Cup, they win the President's Cup Grand Final against your Dragons. And my cousin Kane Cross, he actually played in that game. Kane was he was a Cobar boy and brought down on a scholarship with St Greg's and played all these junior reps through SG Ball, Jersey Flegg, President's Cup for the Magpies, and Peter Mulholland was his coach. And ended up taking him over to Perth, which was a contentious issue within our family.
All right. Because
obviously Perth was aligned to Super League.
Yep.
So we were a very staunch ARL family, and that caused a bit of a rift within the family. And I digress. We can touch on that later.
I'm sure we will. I do want to.
Yeah, but no, that era was a fantastic era, and I think the success that they amounted under Warren Ryan in that 91-92 period, especially those first couple of years, it was a shot in the arm for long suffering Western Suburbs Magpies fans, who hadn't reached the final since 1982. So it was a long time between drinks. And I suppose the other positive thing, it virtually gave the people of the Campbelltown, Southwest, Macarthur region, a team to, wow, we've got a football team here. So that sort of galvanised the region there too. Whilst they'd been there since 1987, it wasn't until they really started to have a bit of success and start to play finals football that the Macarthur region really got behind Western Suburbs.
And the stadium was redone about that time, wasn't it? When did the new Campbelltown Stadium open?
That actually happened at the end of 1998.
Oh, was that late? Wow.
Yeah. So a little bit of New South Wales and state government funding. So it went from being in 1987. It went from being a Rana Park to then Campbelltown Sports Ground to Campbelltown Sports Stadium. So it's had three different incarnations. But yeah, 1999 it opened up on the 16th of June, which was a Sunday, against Balmain in round 12 in 1999, and the Magpies won 18-12 to their homecoming. So, so it's that was when they redid the development of the stadium, and they said it cost $20 million. If $20 million gave you a half, shall we say, grandstand on the eastern side, then, wow, $20 million doesn't buy you a lot.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, considering we're, looking at $1.5 billion or whatever it is to redo the SFS and Homebush, it probably makes sense that you don't get much change for $20 million.
It's all about inflation, isn't it?
Yeah. But to stick with the Ryan era and the end of it, I guess, it was a very short window of success. And if you look at 94, you have, Taylor leaving to Norths, you have Dimmick going to Canterbury. So that team gets broken apart, fairly quickly. Is that just kind of market forces at work and, the same battling Wests having their same problems?
Yeah, from the outside looking in, it definitely looked like that as well. Obviously, there was some internal issues with Warren Ryan and the senior leaders of the club, namely in Jason Taylor and Paul Langmack. And for whatever reason, it ended in tears, which was unfortunate. For all the success that Warren Ryan brought to the club, it was very, very short lived.
Yeah.
And it's seen that Western Suburbs were once again going to be, the whipping boys of the competition and back to their old ways of inept administration and, not being an attractive commodity to anyone, any prospective commercial partner or sponsor, which was the case in terms of Masterton pulling their sponsorship and running around in '94 with a blank jersey, which is never good to see. But and then Steve Noyce jumps on a plane, flies to Brisbane, and brings home Tom Rodonigus, and all of a sudden there was this rejuvenation of the football club once again.
That is, I grew up in Newtown. I had no connection to the western suburbs at all growing up. Like Campbelltown might as well have been in Perth or, Bangkok. It was just not part of my world. And so my abiding memory of that era is Tom Reudonicus on the back of a ute, with a megaphone, driving down the street in Campbelltown, urging people to come to the game. Like that's something that sticks in my mind so clearly. And it seems like could you imagine anyone else being able to do what he did with that club, after the Ryan era?
Absolutely not. It's funny. Again, I said before, he may not have had the technical nous that Warren Ryan or your Brian Smiths of the world had, but he had a special element to him, which again no other coach that would have walked in after Warren Ryan at the Magpies would have had been able to basically galvanise the football club, galvanise the team, and bring the community back on board. And he managed to tick all those boxes because purely the fact of he was Tom Rodonigus. That's the best way to put it. You can try and define and make different sort of analogies and comparisons, but at the end of the day, it was Tommy.
Yep.
It was Tommy. That's the best way to sum it up.
In preparation for this, I went and looked at that 96 squad that made the semis and compared it to the 1999 list, widely held as if not the worst, in the top handful of worst NRL rosters and, worst performing teams in the NRL era. When you look at those two teams, I'd say maybe the 96 team is marginally better, but there's not that much of a difference. There's not that much of a gap in quality that could see one make the top 8 and one be held as the benchmark for, bad NRL lists.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the thing. I mean, you're hard pressed trying to, you go through that and you take out, I suppose your Paul Langmax, your Andrew Leedses, hindsight's a wonderful thing. You look back now and you say, Scandalis, the McGuinness brothers, they would have made another NRL team. But I tell you what, you're only talking about 5 or 6 players, and the rest of them would not have been given another NRL contract at any other club.
Yeah.
That's just on face value. But, for whatever reason, in 1996, everything sort of, they really bought into what Tommy was about. They played some enterprising football, and they were a great team to watch, and that was, as a Western Suburbs fan, to this day, even though they made the semis in 91 and 92 under Watt, that 1996 season is still my favourite ever season and favourite ever time as being a Western Suburbs Magpies fan and a rugby league fan in general. I had so many memories from that year. I was in year 7. I was 12 going on 13, and I can remember every single game that I attended that year, and there was always a sense of we're a chance today. We could win. You know what I mean? And I never had that. I didn't have that, in 91, 92, because we were winning we were winning more games than we were losing. But then that 93, 94, 95 period, but then, beating Illawarra in round 1 and then going on and starting to beat the Warriors. And, there was the big win before they played North Sydney Bears on that Monday night thriller. They played Canberra Raiders at Campbelltown, and they tore them to shreds. And we're talking about, Ricky Stewart, Laurie Daly, Ruben Wiki. They had all the stars, Brett Mullins, Kenny Nagus. And you got players like, Brandon Pearson, Paul Bell, Asiri Lang, just coming out and just putting on a masterclass. Steve Georgalis playing at halfback, who was a great utility, but he wasn't a top first grade halfback.
No.
You know what I mean? And Andrew Willis as his halves partner, and they, for whatever reason, everything just worked, everything clicked, and it was magnificent to watch. Yeah.
And was there something extra special in it when, if you look at like the Ryan years, as great as that success was, there's some element of it being imported. It's like you get the super coach, he brings some of his favourite players from Canterbury. This 96 team, you had Tommy coaching, you had these young West juniors coming through. It seemed like it was just the epitome of the Western suburbs as a region and the traditional identity of that club.
Very much so. And I think that was, again, what resonated with the community out there, is they could start to see the green shoots coming through, where you had the talent of this burgeoning Western suburbs junior nursery of Campbelltown MacArthur. As I mentioned before, you had the John Scandalis, Ken and Kevin McGuinness, the McGuinness brothers, Shane McMenemy, Brett Hodson, Asiri Lang, Ron Jones. You had all these juniors that all of a sudden were now starting to come through. Damien Kennedy, who'd been in the system for a while as well, and all of a sudden, when you've got a supporter base that started to embrace Western suburbs, and they can see their own starting to come through and play first grade, actual, born and bred Campbelltown, Western suburbs, Magpies, junior reps from the region, then all of a sudden there's a greater sense of, wow, we're building from within here, and there's a greater sort of sense of ownership, if you like, where we're not going out and trying to buy a comp. We actually are developing. We're developing these players, and that's all through the grassroots of the Campbelltown region. You know what I mean? And whilst it was probably a 9 or 10 year slow burn from 1987 to 1996, all of a sudden you could start to see the prosperity starting to shine through, and the future started to look really, really bright when you had all those juniors coming through, and they weren't just getting their debut for the sake of it. They were getting their debut because they earned their debut, and they were performing admirably. Like they were almost the best players every single week, and that was great to see. And you could just see the potential and the amount of upside. And again, as a 13-year-old sitting on the hill at Campbelltown Sports Ground, I was looking at these kids going, wow, our future's bright. If we hold on to these guys, this is going to be absolutely, we're going to be in for a period of grace here.
Mm.
Hey, podcaster, meet Acast. We're the top independent podcast network for creators in the know. We empower you to develop your podcast idea, find your audience, and grow listener relationships wherever those listeners are. You'll also find a whole range of ways to make money, from membership plans for paying fans to our fully curated and creative advertising experience. Visit acast.com/network to find out more. Acast, for the stories.
Obviously that's not the way it turned out. We can, maybe touch on the end. But before we get to that, we have that little Super League wrinkle, a minor, event in the history of rugby league. So you mentioned your family's allegiances. Can you just talk me through your feelings of Super League and what you remember about that period as a West fan?
Yeah, well, I can provide a little bit of insight. So again, the 1st of April and April Fool's Day, I remember coming home from school, and it was breaking news on all the nightly news reports, etc., about this this Super League that was going to happen and all the rest of it. And I was trying to get my head around it, saying, what do you mean there's going to be, 2 different competitions? How can this be? And all the rest of it. And, as time, went on that year, and it started to get legs, and, all of a sudden you had, more momentum and players signing and clubs signing and all the rest of it. And I touched on before that my dad was a diehard, Canterbury Bankstown man. He was a Berries man, loved everything blue and white. I remember I came home from school one day, and I've never seen my father cry, but he was in the backyard burning wood and crying, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, Canterbury have gone to Super League. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the Bulldogs have gone to Super League. And he grabbed all his paraphernalia, grabbed all his merchandise, just threw it all
Oh, my God.
Yep.
Wow.
And I said, what are you doing? You know, I was only 12. I said, what are you doing? And he said, no club is bigger than the game, mate. And I went, wow, okay, this is what it's come to. So, and I'm sure there's many other stories out there, people like my dad who just basically threw it all in. It hurt him that much that, you know, the club that he loved had turned their back on the ARL. And I went, wow. So I knew where I stood, because I thought, well, you know, if Dad is making such a statement like that, then, you know, yeah, for the love of Christ, I hope the Magpies don't go to Super League.
Yeah.
because geez, it's going to be boring not watching any football. And but thankfully, you know, they didn't. They stayed with the ARL. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and we'll touch on that. But as I said, my cousin had followed Peter Mulholland to Perth, and knowing that Perth had signed with the Rebel competition, Super League was a dirty word within our family, to the point where I remember we had a family function, and we had Kane's some of Kane's family come and stay with us. And they were all, the funny thing is, because they were all from Cobar, they all became Canterbury Bankstown supporters because of my dad. So because my dad always used to go from Belmore and go see the family up there, and he'd take, you know, all these, you know, merchandise and footy and footy stuff and all that. And because of Dad, they all became Bulldogs fans. So they were all Bulldogs fans. And I remember in 1997 we had a family function down, and as you know, that Channel 9 had exclusive rights to Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
And I remember my second cousin, John O'Brien, was sitting in our lounge room, and he turned on the TV and he put it on Monday Night Football, Super League. And Dad came out and turned the TV off, and he said, we don't watch Super League in this house. And to the point, they nearly come to blows. So to say that, you know, it was a testing time for, and many friendships were lost within the game. Tell you what, there was a lot of families that were split up by it as well. More so when you had someone that was involved so directly and involved in playing in Super League, like my cousin was. Yeah, it was a very, very tense time, and battle lines were drawn on both sides of the family, to the point where it was almost like if we went to a family function, a family birthday, a family barbecue, you know, there was an impasse. You didn't talk about rugby league.
Yeah, wow.
The fact, because it was going to end in blows.
That's crazy.
I know, absolutely. So,
did your dad's feeling on the Dogs ever soften?
I think it has now. Like he wears an old CB hat. You know, he's still very Canterbury Bankstown aligned. Les Johns was his idol. You know, he thinks Steve Gearin should be made an immortal. So he's for catching that for catching that kick, you know, and so like he's still got his memories in that regard, and he still loves Belmore. You know, like I take him to the return to Belmore games still, and he wears his blue and white, and he sits there now. So that the hatred and the disdain that he had for the club because they went to Super League, it has sort of subsided quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I time heals all wounds, as they say. And like I've always said to him, I go, you're so lucky that you still have the Bulldogs. I don't have the Magpies. You know, and like you should be very grateful that you've still got a club, and you should be very grateful that, you know, Bullfrog put the Bulldogs first. You know, he was club first. And I said, you know, if only the Magpies had a Bullfrog, you know what I mean? Like they might still be there. Who knows? You know, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But yeah, he whilst he isn't as ardent, he doesn't go to games and all that anymore. Whenever the Bulldogs are playing, he always watches them. And the reason why he'll never win a tipping comp, he still tips them every week as well.
I've happily missed out on 4 points in the last 4 weeks by not tipping the Dragons, so I'm not going to tip them again this season.
Keep going, mate. It's working.
You've partially answered my next question, but I wanted to ask you, you mentioned being, ARL steadfast all the way in 1995. How have your feelings about the war evolved, and what do you think, West should have done?
The narrative, I suppose, from an ARL perspective, and again, it was purely PR, is that, Rebo and Murdoch and, anyone aligned to Super League was the devil, and, they were evil and sinister and all the rest of it. And if you were, firmly planted in the ARL camp, that's the line you took. And that's all you had that tunnel vision, and you didn't want to hear about anything from the other side. So I was very, very, very firmly of, as the bumper stickers put it, that the ARL must run the game, and it was the people's game, and it was being taken over, and all the rest of it hijacked by media tycoon, etc. And now knowing what we know, and over paid television and all the other sort of things that went on, it's again knowing what we know. I wish. Yeah, obviously, if things could have been done differently, they would have. I think everyone admits that. That whilst the vision, as you guys love to put it, whilst I believe the vision had merit and the vision was right, I think the execution was terrible. Yep. And that's not necessarily to say that it was all News Limited and Rebo's fault for that regard. I think the ARL's got to take some blame here as well. Their reluctance to see the forest for the trees, or look over the back fence and realise that they needed to grow, and the reluctance of putting expansion and retraction off year after year after year after year is like, we're in this state of flux now as a game where no one wants to make any hard decisions. Everyone talks about expansion. Everyone talks about there's too many teams in Sydney. And we seem to keep getting tied up in this emotional not to be able to make the hard decisions for the long-term prosperity of the game and growing and going forward. And again, going back to that point of that, I wish, whilst I know they weren't spoken to by News Limited, I wish that they were. I wish the Magpies were approached by News Corp, and I wish, if they had gone, Michael, I would have gone with them. And whilst I probably would have been living out of a cardboard box because Dad would have kicked me out of the house, knowing that, and I always keep coming back to this point, I make this point to anyone that will listen, is that all the Sydney clubs that went to Super League, they're still there. And who's to say that the Magpies wouldn't have been there if they had went? So, it's, I don't know, it's one of those things where, if you had a time machine and you had a crystal ball and, you could change the course of time and course of action, I would have loved to have seen Lachlan Murdoch pick up the phone to Jim Marsden or Martin Bullock and say, we want to have a conversation and, we want Western Suburbs in Super League. And if they had gone, and that means that they'd still be around today, then I would have been at peace with that. And I think that if you now talk to Magpies fans, knowing what we now have as a football club and our lack of representation through the joint venture, because perception is everything, and everyone still sees it as virtually a rebranded Balmain. I think majority of Magpies fans, knowing what we know now, would have quite happily gone to Super League if it meant we were going to be Western Suburbs in our entire sovereignty.
Well, let's talk about that, because I noticed from your social media presence that you are not a West Tigers fan. So talk me through, that merger process and your feelings at the time and what led you to kind of walk away from the joint venture.
Yeah, it's funny. I reckon two of the saddest days of my life was one when my late grandfather passed away, who was the reason I became a Magpies fan, which was the 22nd of March, 1993. And the other saddest part of my life was the 27th of July 1999, and I remember sitting up as a 16-year-old watching, the late night news on Channel 9, Sports Tonight, with Tim Webster, and trying to get all the news updates of what was happening. And when they announced that, the football club members of the Western Suburbs Magpies and Balmain Tigers have agreed to enter into a joint venture to create the West Tigers, I felt like someone had died. That was the feeling. I know that sounds very dramatic, but for someone who just lived and breathed and loved Western Suburbs more than life itself, to know that all of a sudden there was going to be no Magpies in the NRL, and I wouldn't be able to cheer for a Magpies team ever again, that devastated me. That just completely, talking about it now, I still get emotional. Yeah. And that was, I remember that weekend they played Parramatta at Campbelltown, and Noel Kelly addressed the game at halftime, and, he got up and he just said, he was absolutely beside himself that the club had decided to go down the track of, of forming a joint venture. He was very adamant that he would have rather have seen the club die on its feet than, and die on its knees and enter into a joint venture. And I remember the words, he goes, by Christ, I wish I never heard the words of Super League. It was a very emotional time. Again, it still is an emotional time thinking about it and knowing, and this is what I keep telling to people, like, so for almost 11 years, 10 years, over a decade, I was, I cheered Magpies all my life, and now all of a sudden the game's telling me now you got to cheer Tigers. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? So, and that was it. So I couldn't continue going along the lines of wanting to be a West Tigers fan. It doesn't matter how much I tried, purely the fact that they weren't Magpies. And so I couldn't do it. And I'm very fortunate that, I've one of my closest friends is Kevin McGuinness, and I used to go to West Tigers games and cheer him on without a great deal of support or affiliation or affinity with West Tigers. Like, if they won, I was happy for Kevin, but I didn't walk out there. I didn't walk out of the ground thinking, we won. It was, I'm glad they won for him, and it was good to see him still go around. But I remember going to Leichhardt. Dad dragged me along to Leichhardt in their first trial match against the Northern Eagles, and they ran out in like a tricoloured strip, and Dad's trying to go, oh, look, they look like the Magpies, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, they're not the Magpies, but. And I remember I started yelling out, Wes, in the grandstand, and I was housed down by so many people saying, they're not West, they're Tigers. And I just thought, okay, well that just solidifies everything for me. You know what I mean? And even now, you can go to any West Tigers game. If someone tries to get a West chant up and running, it's drowned out very, very quickly. And it's just, again, it was an emotional time. It still is. Every time I see, West Tigers play, I think, wow, that could still be the Magpies. You know what I mean? And those bludgers didn't even win for Tommy yesterday.
Yeah.
Horrendous.
20 years on, there's obviously some strong personal feelings there. 20 years on, do you think maybe your feelings would have softened if there was a better attempt to actually represent Western Sydney? Like, because it's something I really struggle with, that the future of rugby league isn't, this tiny little pocket in the inner west. Like, to me, the future is this massive geographical area, this massive area of rugby league people and great juniors and all the rest of it. And it just seems that it may be just a public perception, but it feels that there's been no real attempt by the Tigers to become the team of the West.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head. This is a bugbear of mine. and has been for a long period of time. I remember when they formed the joint venture, Jim Marsden, who was the Magpies chairman at the time, came out and said after 3 years the franchise is going to be actually calling the Campbelltown Macarthur area home. And I know that gave a lot of people hope, thinking, okay, well, these guys are really serious. They're actually going to own the area. They're going to foster it the way it should be. And rightly so. I mean, they've been out there since 1987. So from 1987 to 1999, the Macarthur region had a full-time team. And then all of a sudden they went from from 99 onwards, they went from a part-time team to now they're a casual team that blows in 3 times a year and calls themselves the people's team. They're not the people's team. You can't turn up and treat people like mugs for 3 times a year, several times a year. Not only that, look at who they're playing. They're playing out of towners. Like their next game's against the Gold Coast Titans. They're not bringing anyone. There's no derby there. There's no sort of big time support. Like play a Western Sydney team there. Play a Parramatta there. Play a Bulldogs there. Play a Panthers there. Play someone of notoriety, and have that real, foster some sort of big development crowd out there, rather than playing out of towners purely the fact because of commercial reasons you want to pack your corporate suites at Bank West. Like, come on, that's what it's all about. Let's be honest. But they've done nothing. They've done nothing to really resonate and build this support in the Macarthur area. They've had ample opportunity to do so. As you said, they've been established as a franchise and a brand for 20 years, and what have they attained? Nothing. And where are they putting all their eggs? Everything's in the inner west.
Yeah.
Like, if they were fair dinkum, why didn't they build the centre of excellence in the Campbelltown Macarthur region? Why are they putting it on Parramatta Road in Concord? Really, let's be honest. Like, again, I touched on it earlier in terms of the Bradley report and the Kerridge report after that, is that everything continues to point to the same thing, that, the growth of the game and its support is west of Homebush. Like the demographics, the supporter bases are going towards Western Sydney. So you're talking about Parramatta, Penrith, Campbelltown, Liverpool. That's where the growth area is out there. Camden. Camden is the largest, fastest growing LGA in New South Wales.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's only second to the Gold Coast in Australia. Why wouldn't you want to go fish where the fish are? I just do not understand it, where there's this pot of gold that's sitting at the end of the rainbow, in the Campbelltown Macarthur region, and they don't want anything to do with it. Like the Bulldogs wanted to try and get it in, that late 90s period when they went out with Stardome and tried to create that sort of gateway to the western suburbs. And, I know the Roosters made some overtures, affiliating with the Narellan Jets to try and jump in on the act of trying to source the juniors there. And now South Sydney Rabbitohs have formed an affiliation with the Macarthur FC A-League Football Club. They're running coaching clinics there. They're running members' days in the Camden and Campbelltown region. And what are West Tigers doing? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's just dumbfounding.
It's baffling for a start, and it's just terrible business. Like it doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of juniors and playing strength. It's baffling. I don't understand it.
Well, I'll throw this at you. If you're a young, junior that's coming through, right? So you're playing Harold Matthews or SG Ball, and you're coming through the ranks of Western Suburbs Magpies. Where's the pathway to play and represent and play for your local team? There isn't. Yeah. If you want to play for your local team, you've got to go 64 kilometres into the inner west of Sydney, because let's be honest, that's where you're going to be training. So if you're a local from Picton or Wilton or Menangle, Thurul or wherever, or Oran Park, Gregory Hills, all of a sudden, if you want to be playing, senior level football for your inevitably, your first grade NRL representative side, which is West Tigers, you've got to travel 64 plus kilometres to Concord to train. That to me, that just doesn't make sense. It really, really doesn't. And look, I'm a realist. I understand the commercial realities, and there seems to be a school of thought and along the lines of the reason why they are basing themselves in the inner west is because the corporate support and the commercial support is all governed from the city, and apparently there is no, there's no commercial sponsorship or incentive that's based in the western suburbs of Sydney. So in order to fill up a jersey full of multi-million-dollar sponsors, it's best business practice is to continue to base themselves in the inner west to try and get as much commercial support as possible. I don't buy that, because if that was the case, why are Parramatta and Penrith covered in sponsors?
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense.
And I know you're dealing with different constitutions and all these little, technical things, but I just think at some point the NRL has to step in as well and say, look where the people are. Like, how is this sustainable, the strategy you're going with?
Well, that's it. I remember Jim Marsden, let's be honest, Jim Marsden hasn't had a role with Western Suburbs or West Tigers since 2000 when he was deputy chair. Now, he made some overtures a few years ago to contact David Smith, the then CEO, and John Grant. And he actually organised them to come and look at the Southwest. So he organised this bus tour, and he took them around Campbelltown, he took them around Camden, he took them around Wallandilly, and he showed them the amount of development and prosperity and how the population was growing and where it was going. And, the new Western Sydney Airport is going to be a catalyst for economic growth. And there was, he tried to sell this vision that we need a full-time team out here and it needs to be West Tigers. And they were, oh, yeah, great, no worries. But that was as far as it went. Now, it shouldn't take someone external to try and, turn the light switch on and let the ARL Commission know that, hey, you've got a population out here, you've got a growth region out here, which is, again, I said before, it's the largest LGA, growing LGA in New South Wales, and it's second in Australia behind the southeast corridor of Queensland. Why wouldn't you want to be tapping that and securing that? Because there's a wolf at the door, which goes by the name of the AFL. You've also got A-League now that's making inroads into the into the southwest as well. So there's the competition for hearts and minds is there to be won, because at the end of the day, it hasn't been won over by West Tigers. Like at the end of the day, yeah, you've got some rusted on members and stuff, but a lot of people have neglected and turned their back on the franchise purely the fact that they feel that the franchise has turned their back on them.
Mm. Now, you may feel differently to me about this, but I'm keen to get your thoughts. To me, the joint venture was born out of mediocrity on both sides, and that being, it was kind of driven by fear. To me, you had two more natural mergers of Parramatta and Balmain, Western Canterbury. They made geographical sense. It was a natural fit. But in both cases, I think West and Balmain were scared of being dominated by a more successful partner. To me, it's just, I think it was a golden opportunity lost to not go with those two ventures. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. And knowing what we know now and all the rest of it, if they had their time again, if you looked at all the pros and cons and the synergies and everything there, it was definitely a much greater fit for Canterbury and Western Suburbs to enter into a joint venture. Albeit Western Bulldogs or names, that's by the wayside. But I think one of the most important things that union would have created is that would have actually fostered that Campbelltown Macarthur region, because obviously Canterbury could see the fruits that were starting to, and the green shoots that were popping through there, and the amount of juniors that were coming through and the population. They could see all that, and they would have, they wanted in because of their interest in Liverpool, etc. So to me, that would have made a greater natural fit, and the region would have actually had a team. That's the thing. They would have had a full-time team. They would have had a team that actually wanted to be there, that wanted to foster, that wanted to develop the junior nursery there and bring all that, through. And I think whilst, again, the poor old Maggies might have got stiffed, but the thing is that at least the Campbelltown-Macarthur region, the community there and the juniors there would have had something to actually aspire to and support. And I think from a game perspective, the game would have been better off with that too. You know what I mean? And I think you're right. I completely agree with that. I'm on the same page with you as well. Not to say that I would have supported it, but I'll tell you what, I probably would have preferred to cheer for the Bulldogs than the Tigers. So yeah.
Well, we're spiraling into a very negative place. So I wanted to hopefully finish on a positive and talk about the Magpies today playing in the New South Wales Cup. Do you have any involvement? Are you attending games? Yeah,
I try and get to as many games as I can. I haven't been to Lidcombe this year, but I know there's a return to Lidcombe Day coming. I think might be coming up against your mob, the Dragons, actually.
Oh, okay.
So we might have to facilitate something there.
I'll be up for that.
Very good. But it's great to see the Magpies, flying, in the lower tiers and everything again. I think that having that heritage and, the presence of a foundation club, in the second tier and third tier competition is great to see, and it's great for the game as well, because at the end of the day, preserving and promoting your history is very, very important, especially when we're a game that's, steeped in so much history of 113 years. It's you can't go forward without knowing where you've been. And I know that when I came on as a director and then as a general manager of the football club in one thing that the Magpies were struggling with was transitioning its remit as a football club and having a purpose in terms of, we're no longer an NRL club, we're no longer a first grade entity. So what is our purpose? What is our prime function? What is our mission statement as a business now? So they had to recalibrate. And one thing that I had to really make sure that the football club understood what its role was is that it was now seen as a pathway to success. And what I mean by that is that, well, it doesn't mean its time in rugby league is spent or wasted, etc. It needed to just basically recalibrate itself as a football club and realign its objectives. And what I mean by that is that you've got a burgeoning junior nursery in the Campbelltown-Macarthur region. It's got still junior representative sides, and that needs to be a conduit to make sure that those juniors and those junior reps and those stars that are coming through that region have a pathway to get to the NRL. So that in itself is ensuring that Western Suburbs Magpies as a district football club still has a very significant role to play in the grassroots and the development of players to go on to play first grade in the NRL. So, there's going to be a future generation of John Scandalises and Brett Hodsons and Ken and Kevin McGuinnesses and Ronnie Joneses and Shane McMenamies, and you're still going to have those kids from that area still come through. They may not necessarily all go on to play for West Tigers, but if they can still filter and play in the NRL, then the Magpies Football Club is still doing its due diligence and doing a role there and providing the game with what it needs to. So that I'm really glad to see that the football club still has a purpose. I'm still glad to see it represented in the New South Wales Cup, in the Knock-On Effect Cup, and being a feeder to West Tigers as well. And they're actually travelling better than West Tigers at the moment. So go you Maggies. It's and obviously they've gone back to their roots at Lidcombe Oval with the Ron Massey Cup. So there's a little bit of nostalgia there, as well as combining its future direction with its New South Wales Cup activities, and obviously being a 90% shareholder of the NRL franchise. You wouldn't know looking at it, but they are in a much better spot than they've ever been. So that itself is a good thing.
That's probably a good note to end on. So I'll see you at Lidcombe for a couple of beers. A friend of the show, Max Easton, will be running the bar. So let's make that happen. But for today, I want to thank you so much. This was an amazing chat, Daniel. So really appreciate your time.
No dramas, mate. Again, it's my pleasure, and I love everything you guys do. You and Andy, it's my favourite podcast, and I urge everyone to tune in and listen. And it's a great educational tool as well.
I appreciate that, mate. So thanks again, Daniel Watson-Hayes. Up the Maggies.
Go the Maggies.
Hey podcaster, meet Acast. We're the top independent podcast network for creators in the know. We empower you to develop your podcast idea, find your audience, and grow listener relationships wherever those listeners are. You'll also find a whole range of ways to make money, from membership plans for paying fans to our fully curated and creative advertising experience. Visit acast.com/network to find out more. Acast, for the stories.